Sandeep Batta is lead solutions architect for IBM. As a thought leader and lead solutions architect in the HyperProtect organization, Sandeep focuses on security and risk management for clients in the financial services, insurance, and digital asset sectors, focusing on solutions that bring the latest in cryptography and confidential computing to customer use cases. Sandeep Batta joins us now. Welcome to CyberSip.
Thank you, Kevin, for the introduction. And I just want to begin with saying that this is me representing myself, my own views, and not necessarily IBM's views on some of the solutions that I'm going to talk about. So with that out of our way, we can get started.
Let's get started. Let's
be on the podcast. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you, and I'm excited to hear our discussion, particularly with respect to Zero Trust and HyperProtect. Before we go any further, I do want to point out Sandeep is going to be working with some very nice PowerPoint slides during our discussion. So for those of you that are listening alone, we're going to make this podcast interesting to you, even if you can't see the PowerPoint slides. But if you'd like to see them, I think the best way to access this episode will be through my LinkedIn page. Just click on the link there and you'll see the visual as well as hear the audio. So with that, Sandeep, I'm going to give you a second or two to share your screen, and I'll tell our audience that we're going to begin with the question, what is Zero Trust, and why should our audience be aiming for Zero Trust in 2024 and soon to be 2025?
Yeah, before I start with my slides, Zero Trust is a concept that has been gaining ground for, I would say, about 1 or 2 years now. And especially because of so many news items that come around very often these days, where things have been broken into, systems have been, we get so many things in the mail these days saying your information has been leaked, 70 million records have been compromised and all that. And most often than not, it happens because of the way information is being handled. The databases have been designed, sometimes insider attacks. Those have become really common. So the concept of Zero Trust is where you kind of bring all your systems into an environment where the whole environment comes together in a zero trust fashion. That means that you don't trust your insiders, you don't trust the outsiders, you trust the technology. The technology should provide you the what I call it as technical assurance, that once the application is running in a technically assured platform, you are assured that none of the insider attacks or outsider attacks are going to be bothering you. And that's where the concept of Zero Trust comes in. And as we go into 2025, as you said, we need to be very mindful of all the advances in technology that are coming through, especially with encryption technology progressing the way it is with quantum computing. We are going to have a really active kind of cybersecurity landscape where things have to be in a zero trust environment. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but then it requires that kind of mention, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think it does. And with that, let's turn to your presentation and start with the question. I think it's a perfect segue. Where are we going? We're here at the end of 2024. Where is the world going? What do we need to pay attention to?
Sure. So let me start the screen sharing here. What I'm starting with is, where is the world going right now? And as dynamic and accessible as any piece of content in your phone. For example, you have your shopping carts on phone. Sometimes you have your credit card information in a wallet on your phone. You go about using your cell phone as your payment device. Most often than not, you have digital assets on your phone in terms of your cryptocurrencies or something like that. But as we go along, is going to be even more pervasive, and in terms that um, governments are talking about central bank digital currency. So you're going to have not the dollar bills, but you're going to have probably dollar tokens in your wallet, in a digital wallet. And so the growth of digital assets in terms of whether it's currency, whether it's any other assets that you might have, your house is probably the biggest asset you have, and it's in the form of a digital asset somewhere in an organization which holds your title or your insurance or anything like that.
Mhm.
So there is this estimated 16 trillion of digital assets under custody that's going to be by 2030, and the market cap of cryptocurrencies is about 2.83 trillion as of March 2024. Apple Pay, which we are all kind of, and it has become kind of ubiquitous right now. Nobody pays attention if you're paying with your phone. It's about 92% of global market share.
It's
Uh,
a tenfold increase in the
10
last eight
yeah.
years alone.
Exactly. And it's only going to grow exponentially from this point onwards as internet becomes widely available across different corners of the world.
Mhm.
And in that context, we want to highlight that confidential computing as a market will grow to about 7 billion to 8 billion by 2030. So I think it's a perfect segue to talk about confidential computing now. Kevin, what do you think?
Yes.
So, looking at this slide deck, which is kind of animated, but for people who are listening into the podcast, what I'm trying to bring together in this slide is all kinds of digital assets that might come into the purview of confidential computing or zero trust, as we talk in the regular parlance here. So it's a dollar bills, your credit cards, your deeds for your most important asset, your house, and everything else that come together. Your your connection to your energy providers, your shopping carts, everything is going to be included. Your investments, for example, all that is going to come into the purview. And as we go into 2025 and beyond, the rate at which quantum computing capabilities are coming to the market is something very astounding. So, Kevin, should we go into quantum computing and how it's
Let's
going
do
to?
that. Great. I think it's a perfect segue. And let's start with the basic question. What do we mean by quantum computing, and why should our audience be thinking about that? And how does it figure into all of this interconnectivity that we're talking about?
Right. So, great question. And to kind of um, baseline on what we are talking about. So, what we do traditionally today with all our computing devices is classical computing, where we have a flow that we go through while solving a problem. I mean, the basic thing is a flow chart that we all probably understand and grew up with. Quantum computing is going to bring a whole lot of capabilities that the traditional classical computing has been unable to solve up until now, unless you have like computing capabilities that go beyond what we have today. Like, for example, some of the weather prediction models that we have, um, using the traditional classical computing requires supercomputers and other capabilities uh, that are not enough as of today. There are some like when you talk about drug manufacturing, there is a long wait time for simulations to come through, and you have to go through a drug trial, probably 6 months, 12 months, depending on um, what kind of regulatory environment you are going through. All these things, when you think about the quantum computing market, it's going to uh, it's going to fractionalize the time that we take today with classical computing. For example, just for an example, right now the encryption that we use to protect our data, it's probably RSA encryption, and RSA encryption um, is, as we speak, is no longer secure, considering what quantum computing capabilities are going to bring in. What that means is the data that you have protected today, for example, in your bank, all your data is going to be encrypted with an RSA encryption key,
Hmm.
and that encryption can be uh, broken with classical computers of today. It will take some number of years to get through and break that encryption. But with a quantum computer, it might be possible to break an RSA encryption in probably an hours or days. So that's the kind of growth we are talking about. If you see on this slide that I'm showing right now, in 2022, um, and the capacity of quantum computers is measured in qubits, and it's like 433 qubits in 2022. In 2023, just within a year, it multiplied. It's about four times right now the capability that we have in terms of what quantum computing can bring in terms of the number of qubits. And the next 10 years, it's going to be 100 times more, something like that. So it's kind of exponential, but then this kind of capability is good for us because it's going to help us solve a lot of problems that we have today. For example, the drug simulation, drug manufacturing, some of the weather prediction models, some other um, prediction models in the financial markets, for example. There has been a lot of activity in our financial world where they are looking into quantum computing capabilities to improve their market prediction algorithms and all that. So while on one side we have a great impact of quantum computing, the other um, flip side is going to be it's going to help bad actors break our encryption.
So, focusing on your next slide, if I could, you were asking then, why is it time to act now? Why in this environment, sort of in the early stages of the advances offered by quantum computing? Why now, and what is the potential impact on the data groups that we talk about most frequently: healthcare, financial, and government data?
So it's time to act now because as we know the capabilities of quantum computing is increasing, so do the bad actors, and
Mm-hmm.
bad actors are just waiting in the wings right now. Any breach that you see that comes into the news, there is probably 20 times more a breach that has happened and nobody knows about it as of now, and that is the scary part. And why is it scary? Because all the data that is encrypted today with the technology that we have today, and if it is like some organizations may not have moved into the current quantum safe encryption technology, so they are still in the old what we call as DES encryption, DES, or other um, encryptions of the 70s and 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Those are vulnerable right away. And all the bad actors who have gotten hands on encrypted data, they're just waiting in the wings for quantum computing to be available so they can unencrypt the data and then basically run amok with it and do whatever they want to do. Ransom, or I mean, we have seen in current day where hospital systems have been hacked and and like ransom has been given to get back the data. So this kind of what we call in today's parlance um, as kind of what do you call harvest later kind of attacks. It's like you are you are having a crop right now, and you are waiting in the wings to harvest it later, because you're going to have the capability in the future to kind of unencrypt that and do whatever you want with your with personal data. In case of healthcare, it could be clinical trials data, which usually lasts for 25 years or more. Healthcare records, especially in country like Japan, where a long like longevity goes into 100 years and all. Radiation records, 100 years. Your mortgage in the financial sector, 35 years of mortgage is very common. So anything that is hacked today, within 20 years, it's going to be not encrypted anymore, because people are waiting in the wings.
So that leads me to two thoughts before we turn to your phrase, which I very much like, mitigate before migrate. Two things that I think our audience should keep in mind then. The mere passage of time does not make you safe. You know, we have credit monitoring in the case of data breaches. And very often we say, all right, well, a year's worth of credit monitoring, maybe 2 years of credit monitoring, that'll be okay. I'm using this as an analogy. But when you turn it, you turn that analogy towards business data, what I think you're saying, Sandeep, is, you know, the mere fact that your data hasn't been harvested or used against you after 1 year or 2 years or 5 years should not give you comfort. If that data has been harvested, eventually the threat actors are standing by, waiting for the technology to change, and eventually they will be able to de-encrypt that data. So that's one thing to keep in mind, right? The second thing that I think we should keep in mind is that we're no longer in a world in which we can say, if you have MFA, whatever that means, you're fine. Or if your data is encrypted, you're fine. Increasingly, the question becomes, what kind of MFA do you have? What kind of encryption you have? You as a CEO or a general counsel may be told by your in-house information technology or outside information technology or security professionals that you've got your data's encrypted, so you're good. And the answer may be that you're not good, that the form of encryption you have is not going to last forever. And so I think it sounds to me, Sandeep, one of the things that a business needs to do is know what questions to ask and keep asking those questions, because the answers change over time. What's your take on that?
I mean, the phrase "mitigate before migrate" and stems from the fact that regulation is often behind a couple of years behind technology, and we have technological advancements in terms of encryption technology, quantum computing, and then there's something called quantum safe computing, where you want to encrypt with algorithms which are quantum safe. That means that even though a bad actor might have a quantum computer to break your encryption, because of the quantum safe algorithms that we can use for protecting data, nobody is forcing our organizations, financial institutions, and healthcare companies, management companies, and all that to kind of keep up with the technological developments, because that's all investment that has to go in. And when you
Yeah.
weigh in what is the kind of investment that you put in, often the calculation comes to whether I should invest now or take the risk by insuring my technology, so that the payout for the insurance is much less than investment. And that's the kind of balance that has to be struck
Yeah.
when it comes to mitigate before migrate.
No doubt about that. So, is this a good point to transition then? When we're talking about mitigation, that leads us sort of naturally into zero trust, right?
Exactly. Yep, exactly. And that's a great segue into our main topic. I mean, we spent 10 to 15 minutes talking about why, and now the topic itself is zero trust. And what we can do in the present time with the current technology base that we have available today to protect our future in terms of data security. And as we know, security of data comes in three forms. One is data at rest security. Data at rest is when data is on storage medium, for example, a hard disk or a tape drive or cloud object storage or something like that. That Amazon S3 buckets, for example, that's a data at rest. So data at rest is always encrypted, supposed to be encrypted by all kinds of regulations and all kinds of NIST-based controls that companies follow, organizations are required to follow in the financial sector and healthcare sector. The second is data in motion. So when data is moving from one server to another or from a server to your mobile device or something like that, that's data in motion. So all the data that flows through the wire needs to be encrypted, and TLS has been doing a fantastic job of that for years to come. Although the last, I mean, there is quite a few companies which have not moved to the latest version of TLS yet. That is kind of not surprising given the investment that goes into changing the infrastructure and all that. The third is data at rest. Data in use. Sorry about the confusion there. Data in use is when data is loaded into the computer. Like, for example, you want to do 1 plus 1 equals 2, right? So the way it works on the server is you load one and you load another one and you do an add operation, and that comes to 2. Now, if that one, if the two parts of the equation are encrypted, then you cannot do an add operation until you unencrypt the data. Although there are other technologies like homomorphic encryption and all that, which is out of scope for this podcast here. Probably in a future podcast we can talk about that. But in the traditional world, we have to have data in unencrypted format in the server's memory to be able to perform operations on that. And that is where we have seen system administrators, for example, a person who has access to the server itself in the data center, he can go and get physical access to the machine and dump the memory. Dumping memory is nothing but looking at what is happening inside the server's the random access memory, the RAM memory. So, and that dump of memory can reveal a lot of information, as we have seen in some of our tests here. So what we need is a zero trust environment. It's something like what you see in the picture here, and for viewers, for listeners, I would say it's like a SCIF, sensitive compartmented information facility. A SCIF is nothing but a secure compartment. You must have heard about a SCIF in TV shows like NCIS or FBI.
The president of the United States, during any sensitive meetings,
Yes.
sits in a skiff, and if he or she is traveling, the skiff can take on a very interesting part. It could be in a hotel room. It could be in a bedroom. It's just anything that can be secured.
Right.
So when we think about this super secure facility, that's the analogy that we should be thinking about when we're talking about zero trust.
Exactly. So a SCIF is where it is designed to go inside a SCIF and open your confidential documents, or you want to do some confidential conversation, you go inside the SCIF and do it. And that is the zero trust environment that we are talking about, and how we can bring all our sensitive applications and run them inside a SCIF kind of facility, which provides us the zero trust environment with the technical assurance that no one else can look into what is happening inside it. So that's the zero trust environment that I wanted to bring along here.
So when we're turning to our next slide, I think it's perfect then. So the question I have is, all right, if we're implementing zero trust, what kinds of services and systems fall within that framework, that secure place within the organization?
Right. So usually, I mean, you have all kinds of data inside an organization's environment. So you don't want to burden yourself by putting everything inside a zero trust environment. So what we call as crown jewel data. For example, for for an organization, there is a set of data sets which are critical to their standing in the market, their reputation. If something
Mm-hmm.
goes wrong, their reputation is lost and the stock price goes down, something like that. So, all that kind of data, which is marked as confidential and crown jewel, those are the things that we want to identify and isolate those applications and bring them into a zero trust environment to work with them.
Are we
So,
talking about things, and I assume we're, and I'll, for those of you that are watching, you can see it. For those of you not watching, I'll let you talk about these briefly, Sandeep. We're talking about critical infrastructure, financial systems, um, and other services that need to be in that environment. Why don't we talk a little bit about that now?
sure. Yep. So, first thing I want to mention, which is crown jewel, is your encryption services. So, everything about data is about encryption, how you store, how you protect it. And the key to encryption is the encryption key itself. So, all your encryption services, so for example, you want to store some data on your hard drive, you go to your key provider, which is usually called as a KMS or key management system, and say, hey, KMS, I want an encryption key to encrypt my data. And you get an encryption key based on your credentials and all that. And you encrypt the data and put it away into the hard drive. Now, for a threat actor, it is much easier to go after your encryption services and get that encryption key instead of spending hours and days and months trying to unencrypt or decrypt your data. So if they have the key to the encryption itself, it becomes much more easier. So instead of like take an analogy of a house, if you have the keys to the house, you can get in. You don't have to break windows and doors to get in and do all kinds of destructive stuff. So you get the keys, you come in royally, and then you get access to everything that you want. Your financial systems, for example, my 401k or my retirement benefits, uh,
Mm-hmm.
stock investments, anything of importance um, is under the purview of threat actors because all they want to do is disrupt and probably take away whatever you have spent years and with hard work and all that. Document management systems that will include your healthcare records, for example, your insurance documents, your deeds for your house. Now, this most important part that I keep thinking about and kind of have sleepless nights is to how to protect our critical infrastructure, like our
Tell
power.
us before we go through that. I apologize if you were going to. Before we
Mhm.
talk about it, give us a good working definition when we're talking about critical infrastructure. What is it, and how do we relate that concept to our organizations?
Sure, I think that deserves some time here. So, our power infrastructure, for example, I mean, we have the grid spans across the whole country, um, and then it has some kind of resilience built into it, but it is not up to the mark when it comes to what threat actors can do, whether it's an internal malicious actor or it could be external actors who are trying to cause disruption. And the other critical infrastructure could be our water systems, for example.
Yes.
the whole city depends on a water system. Millions of people have 24/7 water supply in their house, and water system includes the purification channels that they have, how much chlorine goes into it, what kind of additives go into it. So there is a distinction between what is IT and what is OT. The IT is your environment where you information technology kind of people, they will um, manage the infrastructure and all that. And OT is a operational technology where you have systems which are managing your water purification plant, for example. There are different valves that are connected to IoT devices, and how much chlorine goes into the water or how much other additives go into the water. They are all connected through OT systems, which are operational technology systems. Now, this is critical infrastructure because threat actors, if they get access to that, they can create havoc. And we don't want that to happen. And we want to make sure all that is protected in the best way possible with the best technology that we have today, and keep up with the developments in technology so that we stay one step ahead when it comes to how things can affect us, our daily lives, and all that. So, very important topic there, and it keeps my mind churning all the time.
So yeah, no, it's got my mind churning as well. And I
Yeah.
think for those of us who view critical infrastructure as solely a technical term referring to public infrastructure, I think the takeaway I'm drawing from our discussion here is that we have critical infrastructure in our country: water, power, large scale financial defense, but an organization also has its own critical infrastructure, if you will. And I think we're talking about implementing that zero trust rubric in both the public and private sectors.
Right.
And it makes sense too, Sandeep, because you're dealing with, where the rubber meets the road, you have smaller organizations dealing with government and critical infrastructure. So I think where we're headed is that everyone's going to have to implement zero trust. And because if you don't, you may find yourself unable to be in business with those who are required to implement it.
Right. I mean, when you talk about, say, software build pipelines, what you mentioned about uh, the smaller organizations which may not have all the controls built in, but um, most of the software that we use today is not built by one large company. It's all sourced from different open source platforms or smaller service providers and all that. And everybody may not have the controls that are required at um, a larger organization level. So the whole pipeline needs to be protected and made sure that
Mhm.
we are following best practices and bringing zero trust to all elements of our infrastructure.
So let's pivot then, if we can, to the notion of crypto services for an entire enterprise. How do we think about that, and how do we implement that?
Sure. So, crypto services, as we know, and cryptography is all math, right? So, you have to be able to create an encryption key which you use to encrypt your data. And encryption keys are kind of created using a random number. And if you have a random number generator in software, then it is reproducible. So you can reproduce a random number with some tries and recreate that encryption key that you um, use for your encryption of data and all that. So what regulation calls for is to use a hardware security module. And as you must have heard. In security literature, there are several companies and organizations who provide what is called as HSM services, hardware security module services. And the hardware security module makes sure that you follow the latest in technological developments to create encryption keys in hardware. And there are several NIST based controls available to follow out there.
Mhm.
So, one example that I want to give in this context is anybody who has seen Mission Impossible movie where Tom Cruise, I think it Mission Impossible 4, Tom Cruise goes into a vault. He's swimming in water. He has to go inside and put in a card to kind of get access to the whole infrastructure and all that. So similar kind of as a kind of analogy here when it comes to HSMs, which is hardware security module, is they are controlled by what we call as a FIPS ratings, Federal Information Processing Standards, and HSMs come in different ratings. So, for example, FIPS level one HSM might be say it's protected against voltage fluctuations. The FIPS level 2 might say, oh, it's not only protected against voltage fluctuations, it can also be protected against tamper. It is tamper proof. So anybody tries to break it, it will be protected against it. The level 3 might be where it's protected against earthquakes and all that. So there are different levels of FIPS ratings that you can achieve for the
Mhm.
HSM that we're talking about. And you always want to use the highest rated HSM because that is going to be your root of trust from a zero trust perspective. So the root of trust is how you generate your encryption keys, and once you generate the encryption keys, how do you protect it from external access or malicious access? And that is where I bring in this slide which shows crypto services for the whole enterprise.
Yeah.
The technology keeps moving at a very fast rate. If you have a distributed approach to it, you'll have probably 25 different places in the organization where you'll have to keep updating your technology every time there's a new version available or a new patch that becomes available. So you want to make sure that you have the highest rated HSM in your organization and use that as your root of trust, and you'll be assured that um, being the highest rated HSM, it will be protected against all the known and unknown kind of threat actors.
And I'm thinking as we're going to turn to the air gap for digital assets in a moment here,
Mhm.
Sandeep, but I'm thinking there, how would I explain to an organization why this is important? I mean, there are so many levels in which it makes sense. First, you have data of consumers, you have data of employees, you may have sensitive business data that you need to protect. Secondly, you may be doing business with counterparties that will insist on a higher, more sophisticated security environment, and increasingly that's where we're going. And if we're all not there, we're not going to get to the next step. We're not going to be able to do business with those other organizations. And the third thing I can think of, and you may have other thoughts too, is um, to the extent anyone thinks today or thought yesterday that insurance was going to be a sufficient risk management tool, I think we're all going to be mistaken. I mean, insurance is something that you use after the fact. And I think what we're all learning is that the management of the threat environment in a context of zero trust is really the best way to protect your digital assets. If you're Insurance is an invaluable risk management tool, but if you're focused on insurance, you're really focused on reacting to a bad event after it's already happened. What we're talking about here is creating a network, creating an environment that it may not be impervious to these threats, but it is much stronger and much better positioned to prevent these threats than your existing environment might be.
Correct. Yep, that's right. So on this slide, just to go back a little, I just wanted to give an anecdote of very recent interaction that I've had. So if you see, I have mentioned multi-cloud management as one of our capabilities that is shown here. So I mean, with all pervasive kind of technology landscape, we use different cloud providers to manage. Say for email, we have one
Mm-hmm.
cloud provider. For applications, we have another. And then from a CIO's perspective or a CISO perspective, it becomes very difficult for organizations to keep track of what is happening to the data as it flows through all these different cloud environments. So once my data leaves my firewall, it goes into another cloud environment. Is my data protected there in the different cloud that is going through via email or something like that? And how do I gain control over that? So, for example, if my email is hacked, is it possible for me to turn off access to all data in that cloud provider instantaneously by using some kind of a multi-cloud management? So that is
Mm-hmm.
where the centralized approach makes the most sense, because it's kind of like a red switch in your hand, and you press the red switch and access to data in a remote cloud gets disabled because you disabled the encryption key that was used to protect the data. And this is what I wanted to show, and then we can go to the air gap.
Sure. Let's go to it. Absolutely.
Yes, sorry about going back a bit, but I wanted to.
No, it's okay.
Yeah. Okay, so digital air gap, as we call it, um, for digital assets. So, as you know, digital assets are crown jewel data. It can run into trillions of dollars, as we have seen in our previous slide, and we talked about it. So, we want to make sure that uh, organizations today, when they implement air gap technologies, they are manual air gaps. So what they do is there's no network connection from the inside to the outside or outside to the inside. Any
Mm-hmm.
interaction that happens from an outside actor, it comes in as, for example, an SD card that a physical person, will carry that SD card inside an organization because there is no network connectivity, and plug
Mm-hmm.
that SD card into a server where they can do whatever data processing needs to be done, and then brings back results on the SD card to the outside. So if you see in this slide, what I'm showing is on the right hand side, there is an outside world with applications, users, and databases. And on the left hand side, I have behind the firewall an air gap, which provides the kind of controls and boundary separation that is expected out of critical infrastructure. So this air gap technology that we're talking about is a digital air gap where a person does not need to physically take an SD card and walk over to the other side and then wait until things are done and walk back up with the results. We're talking about um, using technology to our benefit and creating a digital air gap which provides the security admins and the auditors a full, complete view of how the transaction is flowing from the right hand side to the left hand side through the servers and back out to the right hand side. So from user to the server, processing to the outside. Now, why is this required? Is because a person in a manual air gap who is carrying that SD card there's nothing stopping that person from inserting that SD card into some other server to cause some
Right.
disruption or make copies of that. And these are like internal threat actors, right?
Yes.
So you
Yes.
have to prevent against all that by kind of bringing in technology to the fore here and making use of the best way to make things happen.
Right. Again, we're talking about zero trust, which means
Trust,
we're
yeah.
not we're not only distrusting those on the outside, we're distrusting those on the inside for the
Mhm.
purposes of maximizing security and limiting our exposure.
Exactly.
Good stuff. All right. So where to next?
So next, what I have is a build pipelines. So I mean, when we talk about build pipelines, it is all the software that goes into our applications that we run. For example, the digital wallet that you have on your phone or on your banking application. So any misconfiguration of that digital wallet can become very costly very quickly,
Mhm.
and all your hard-earned savings might be lost in seconds.
Yes.
And we have seen this happen where a build pipeline was hacked very recently, with no mention of any names here. But we all know about 2, 3 years ago, a small company was able to kind of introduce bugs from the build pipeline, and that affected thousands of servers.
Yes. Yep.
So,
So,
sorry, go ahead.
no. So what's the answer to that?
So the answer to that is what we called as a secure build services, where we want to make sure the build itself is done in a zero trust um, uh, kind of fashion, where you bring in all your sources into a zero trust environment and
Hmm.
make sure the pipeline is not compromised in any way. When you talk about pipeline, it is like you have a GitHub repository with all your source code. You have a team from the build team. You have an auditor who should check whether the build has gone properly and all the parameters have been met. And then once the build is done, build is like converting that soft source code into executables, and those
Right.
executables have to be put in some kind of a repository, and that repository needs to be protected again because bad actors can hack into any element of this whole pipeline, right from the source code to your digital wallet when it gets
Hmm.
installed on your phone. So, any security update that gets installed on your phone, for example, every now and then, I own myself an Android phone, and over the last 2 months, I must have seen at least 7 or 8 updates to the phone itself. And
Oh,
that
not
is
surprising.
that is scary for me because
Yeah, it is.
yeah. Uh,
Especially you.
and
Yes.
I'm kind of paranoid about it because I know the capabilities of the security infrastructure and where are the shortfalls and all that. So
Hmm.
I'm kind of thinking about it on how do we improve that. So any update that comes to the phone is probably a good thing because they are trying to fix some kind of a bug that has been that has been discovered, and it's kind of scary at the same time because the more updates you are getting, the more chances for things to go wrong again. You introduce
Right.
new
Because
bugs.
you're, yeah,
Mhm.
and the reason is you're introducing more code and changes, and with each one, there's a risk of infiltration.
Exactly. So every new update that comes along, first of all, we have to make sure it comes from the right source. I mean,
Right.
if you're installing applications which are not coming from the authentic sources, then that itself is a red flag. So you want to make sure it comes from the right source, it has the right content, and it has not been infiltrated by threat actors. So that's the
Right.
pipeline that I'm talking about.
All right. So, Sandeep, we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to let you take us through the balance of this really important and useful info in whatever way you think best.
Okay. So I just want to go through one slide, which is kind of um, very present in our current day to day that we are.
Oh, yes.
So imagine you have over the air updates coming to your car, and there are several cars like that with over the air updates coming. What if some threat actor says all cars will turn right at 10 a.m. on so and so date?
Uh-huh.
Imagine the kind of
Well, it
confusion.
would be disastrous. Right.
That's,
Right.
yeah. So this is an example of, again, a critical infrastructure, right? So what is a critical infrastructure here? If you want to identify the parts of the pipeline which are going to affect what is installed in your car. So in your car, you have updates coming, and that's coming from a server somewhere. It's called as the OTA update server, over the air update server.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, assuming that things might go wrong, and things will definitely go wrong sometimes, you want to make sure that you mitigate whatever might happen with whatever you have. So mitigation is going to be possible by using the current technology, the digital air gap that we talked about, to make sure only authorized people have access to the infrastructure that sends out updates to your cars or your phones, for example. It could be anything here, wherever we are getting updates over the air. And then um, I should be authorized to update my own phone or my own car. No one else should be able to send out updates which I don't approve of.
Makes sense.
Those are the things which are very important. And this slide, for example, the digital air gap for connected vehicles, is something that is very close to my heart right now, in terms of the use cases where we want to implement our technologies. So this is where I think most of our discussion kind of culminates in terms of zero trust, and it affects our daily lives in one way or another. And we want to make sure that whatever technologies we have, we make use of that and put it in the right context and practice.
That's it's mind-boggling and critical. I agree with you. But Sandeep, let's suppose I'm an individual or I'm a small, mid-sized business owner, and I'm thinking, I understand what you're saying, but how do I get my arms around this? Where do I even start? I agree that all of these things are important, but I don't have the in-house expertise to get my arms around all of these things. I can't even fully issue spot. I'm I mean the risk of every vehicle turning right, for example, the auto risk. I think it's the stuff of science fiction, but it's potentially very real. So this is a sort of silly question, but if you're in the elevator, it's a long one. You've got to go 50 floors. If you're in an elevator with someone in a position to make these decisions for his or her organization, what's your pitch? How do you explain it in a way that spurs action? Because this is not, no pun intended, a critically important investment that we're all going to be making in the next year or two or three, whether we know it or not.
Right. Yeah. So, in my opinion, trust is most important. You have to trust the technology that you are using every day. You have to trust the partners who are bringing that technology to you, and you have to trust the regulators to kind of enforce regulations across the landscape to make sure regulations keep up with the development in technology. And I mean, some kind of lobbying efforts are also being done to make sure that technology is taken into consideration and regulations keep up with that. So those are important things. From an individual perspective, we have to be mindful of what we are, say, installing on our phones. Make sure we authenticate, or make sure the source of where the updates are coming from, source of the applications. Think twice before you install anything on your phone. Just because it provides a service, installing an application might be really something that you will be putting a big hole in your pocket. So be very mindful of that. So those are
Hmm.
the small things that we can do from our end. But people who are designing systems like the elevator that you mentioned, they have to be mindful of the investment that will go in protecting, and weigh it against the risk that might ensue on the larger population and the community as a whole. So that's my pitch on that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. The community and elected officials, there is a role for government here. I have one last question for you, Sandeep. And it's about the role of a business. What role does a business have to vet technology and vet vendors that it's going to be bringing in? I don't know that I've done this super effectively, but I have been trying to think about and talk about vendors, we call them vendors or third parties, not as separate entities, but as extensions of your business. It's like the vendor is your left arm, the technology is your right arm. It's all, you're going to be accountable ultimately for the way that technology performs. So, what responsibility does an organization have to vet the vendor, vet the technology? Because, of course, in many cases, the vendor is going to have superior knowledge.
Mhm.
So, how does the business go about satisfying itself that this is a trusted vendor, trusted technology, and that the steps it's being told it should take are the appropriate ones?
Right. So, yeah, very, very great question, and it's not very easy to answer or kind of put into practice. But what I have seen is increasingly vendors are trying to differentiate themselves um, by incorporating the regulatory standards in their build process itself.
Yes.
Like whoever says, "Oh, technology works. I don't care about any security issues and all," is kind of misinformed, or kind of very loosely approaching the whole security issue. So I have seen vendors who are very mindful of getting the right certifications done. For example, the FIP certification that I mentioned earlier, about 15-20 minutes ago, that is something that vendors can go through when critical infrastructure is involved. They can A certification will actually dissect the whole process into individual elements and look into
Mm-hmm.
loopholes that might exist, which could be just honest mistakes that people do sometimes while trying to get things done, and nothing wrong in that. But a certification process will kind of unearth all those small little loopholes which might one day become too big to handle. And that's how I think we can mitigate at this point, by making sure all our vendors go through some kind of a baseline of certification, in terms of either it's a SOC 2 certification or NIST based controls that are prevalent, ISO based controls. So there are several countries who are, and trading blocks which are coming up with their own data
Yeah.
security standards, and
Mm-hmm.
they are meant for protecting their own intellectual capital. And we need to respect all that and make sure we follow all that to the best possible way we can.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I think that's a great answer. Certification. Um, All right. Well, before we break, I want to open it up to you. Any final thoughts? Anything that you want to say that we haven't had a chance to cover?
I think we have covered a lot, but then um, the part where digital air gap technology can affect the critical infrastructure, that needs a little deep dive sometimes.
Hmm.
In a future episode, if not me, I can bring in some other expert to talk about it, on
I love that idea.
what is being done. I mean, we have the technology, but how do we implement it, right? At a large scale, sometimes the feasibility comes into picture, and then you have to weigh in the infrastructure, the investment that has to go in, and what is the return on investment. So all those are valid conversations to have, and probably we should tackle it from a business perspective as well, on how technology can best improve business results.
I think that's a great idea. And will you come back sometime? We can talk about the digital air gap, especially in the context of critical infrastructure.
Sure. And I'll bring some partners along with me who can talk business. As you can see, I'm a technologist, and sometimes passion gets the best of me, and I keep rambling about it. But then there has to be a business check to it.
Well, I'm gonna somewhat unusually, I'm gonna end with a quote, and this is from you. Um, it is awful to learn about a problem with the infrastructure or service from the customer. As service providers, we must have the technology to know about issues before the customer does
Yes.
and bring in self healing technology to everyday operations. And you go on to say, I am passionate about making HyperProtect services the platform of choice. And I think I can see why. You have a passion that I'm not saying no one else has a passion, but your passion shows through. And I can't tell you how much I enjoyed having you come on and talk about some of these issues today. I think we could do a podcast episode about each of the slides that we discussed, but I think we made a pretty good inroad in over the last hour or so.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for the opportunity. And
I look forward to having you back, and you should do more of these. You explain it in a way that makes sense to people who don't live it like you do.
thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And thank you for your entire team for setting this up. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks to you, Sandeep Batta from IBM. Thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to having you back on another episode.
Sure.
And thanks to all of you for joining us. We will be back soon, but not really soon, because this is actually the end of our season 3. I wouldn't have, if you told me I'd have 3 seasons of CyberSip, I would not have believed you. But we are now at the end of season 3, so we're going to take a little break. You'll see our micro content and our other publications, and check out Sandeep and his creations along the way too. We'll be back soon, but thanks to all of you for making this possible. I want to thank my producer, Kyla Handley, the entire Barclay Damon Live marketing team, and people like Sandeep who take an hour or more out of the day to come and talk to us. We really appreciate it. So again, Sandeep, thanks again. And thanks to all of you. We will be back soon-ish with another episode of CyberSip. The CyberSip podcast is available on barclaydamon.com, YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Like, follow, share, and continue to listen.